Victoria Crosswell did not wait for her brother to leave the room before she made the call. She sat behind his desk, his chair, his office, his empire, and dialed the journalist's number like she was ordering dinner. Calm, deliberate. A woman who had decided something and was simply executing it. "Everything you need is in the file," she said. The town. The families. Her name. All of it, 3 words, her name. Elara Whitmore had spent 12 years building a life that belonged entirely to herself. No debts, no dependents, no one who could reach into her chest and rearrange things without asking. And in 48 hours, that life would be on the front page of every financial news outlet in the country, attached to the name of a man she had once loved, and a secret so large it had quietly swallowed her entire family without her knowledge. If someone rebuilt your world without telling you, would you call it love? Or would you call it control? If this story already has you asking questions, you are exactly where this channel wants you. Subscribe right now and hit that notification bell, because the stories we tell here do not slow down, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Drop a like and leave a comment with your city or country. I want to see how far this story travels now. Let's begin. The train from Boston took 4 hours and 40 minutes, and Elara spent most of it with her forehead against the glass, watching the landscape change from highways and concrete into something older and quieter. Trees with roots older than anyone living. Stone walls running along hillsides, like the land had stitched itself together. Small towns passing in, flashes a gas station, a steepled church she didn't look at, a school where children were just beginning to file outside. She had not been back to Ravenmere Falls in 3 years. Not because she hated the town. Not exactly. But there was a particular kind of weight that came with returning to the place where you were formed, and Elara had learned that weight was best taken in small doses. A Christmas, a birthday, a weekend at most, before the familiar street started pressing on something she had spent years carefully compressing. Her mother's 60th birthday was not something she could miss. So here she was, restoration case in the overhead rack, a half-eaten bag of crackers on the seat beside her, a folder of project notes she had not opened since New Haven. The slow, creeping awareness building as the train slowed and the conductor announced the station that something was different before she even stepped onto the platform. She felt it first in the air. Ravenmere Falls had always smelled like rust and river water, and the particular stillness of a place that had quietly accepted its own decline. That smell was gone. What replaced it was harder to name. Fresh timber, something industrial but clean, the faint chemical bite of new paint on old stone. Elara stood on the platform with her case in one hand and her bag over her shoulder and looked at the town. The station itself had been repainted. Not the aggressively cheerful renovation color of a city trying to rebrand something closer to its original red, careful and restrained, as if whoever did it had studied old photographs. The benches were new. The flower beds were not the scraggly, half-hearted plantings she remembered, but something deliberate, tended. Across the street, a building that had been boarded up for most of her teenage years was open. A coffee shop, it looked like. 2 older men sat outside it in the afternoon cold with cups in their hands, talking without urgency. Elara's mother was parked at the curb in the same blue Civic she'd driven for 11 years. Vivian Whitmore was a small woman who had spent her life being underestimated, which she had long ago decided was everyone else's problem. She got out of the car when she saw Elara and held her with the particular firmness of a woman who had missed her daughter and was not going to pretend otherwise. "You look thin," Vivian said into her shoulder. "I'm the same weight I've been for 5 years." "Then you've been thin for 5 years, and I've been worried for 5 years." "Come on." Your father made soup. They drove through town, and Elara watched. She tried to do it without making it obvious, but she was a conservator. Observation was not something she could turn off. She cataloged what she saw the way she cataloged damaged paintings, methodically, without judgment, building an inventory. New storefronts, scaffolding on the old mill building. The Ravenmere Community Center, which she remembered as a sagging one-story building with a parking lot full of potholes, now sat behind a freshly poured driveway and new windows. A banner out front announced an evening program for senior residents. "Mom," she said, "what happened here?" Vivian glanced at her from the driver's seat. "What do you mean?" "The town. It looks different. Better." Her mother was quiet for a moment, in a way that felt considered. "Things have picked up," she said. "There's been investment. New company moved in, took over the old foundry. People have been coming back." "What company?" "Ironvale Holdings. Some kind of development group. They've been quiet about it, but your father could tell you more. He works with them now." Elara turned to look at her. "Dad works for them? Heritage consultant. He's been documenting the foundry's history. All those old records he saved when Blackridge closed. Turns out they were worth something after all." Her father, Caleb Whitmore, who had worked the foundry floor for 22 years before the company shuttered without warning. Caleb, who had sat at the kitchen table for 3 months after the closure and not said much of anything. Caleb, who had eventually found time work driving delivery routes and done it without complaint, because complaint was not in his vocabulary, but who had gone from being a man with a purpose to a man with a task, and the difference had hollowed something out in him that Elara had never stopped seeing, even after she left. That man was now a heritage consultant. She sat with that information and did not quite know where to put it. The Whitmore house looked like it always had from the outside, 2 stories, white clapboard, the big oak in the front yard, but as they pulled into the driveway, Elara noticed the roof was new, not repaired, replaced. The gutters were clean aluminum. The porch boards, which had been soft and unreliable for years, had been replaced with something solid. She said nothing. Caleb was at the door before they reached the steps, which meant he had been watching from the window. He was 63 now, gray at the temples, a little heavier than she remembered, but standing differently than the last time she had seen him. Upright, present, the posture of a man who had somewhere to be in the morning. He hugged her with his whole arms, the way he always had. "There she is," he said. "Here I am," she said, into his shoulder. "Come inside before we all freeze." The soup was good. The kitchen was warm. Her parents talked over each other the way they always did, Caleb supplying detail, Vivian correcting the detail, both of them slightly wrong and both of them entirely certain, and Elara ate and asked questions and felt, for a moment, the particular relief of being someone's child again, instead of someone's contractor or colleague. Then her father mentioned the home. It came out sideways, the way things did in families. Not an announcement, just a sentence embedded in a larger story about the kitchen plumbing, about how the pipe under the sink had finally given out in February, and they'd had the whole thing replumbed. And Elara heard the casual way he said Ironvale sent their contractor over and stopped eating. "Ironvale sent a contractor," she said, "to fix your plumbing." Caleb glanced at Vivian. "They handle some of the properties they've invested in. It's part of the arrangement." "What arrangement?" Another glance. Longer dad. "What arrangement?" He set his spoon down. He was not a man who lied easily, and his face showed it, the small struggle of someone deciding between 2 uncomfortable things. "When Ironvale came to town," he said, "they bought up several properties that were in arrears, including this one." The room went very still. "This house," Elara said. "Our house we were behind," Vivian said quietly. "After your father's work situation, we fell behind on the mortgage. We didn't tell you, because you were already established, you had your own life, and there was nothing you could have done. You could have told me. We didn't want to be a burden." Elara pressed her hands flat on the table. She needed something solid. "Ironvale bought the house, and you what? You pay rent to them now?" "No," Caleb said. "They transferred the deed back. Clean title. No mortgage, no rent. They said it was part of a community restoration initiative, helping families that had contributed to the town's history keep their homes." The words landed somewhere in Elara's chest and did not sit right. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "Companies don't do that. Not without something in return." "Maybe this one does," Vivian said. "Mom, companies don't just give people their houses back. That's not how it works." Her father looked at her steadily. "Elara, I know how it sounds, but I have watched this company operate for 8 months now. I have seen what they've done for families on this street, in this neighborhood, across this town. Whatever their reasons, the work is real. The people benefiting are real. She spent the rest of the evening being present with her parents, listening to her mother's stories about the new community garden, watching her father show her photographs from the Foundry archive project on his laptop. He was proud, genuinely, quietly proud. She had not seen that specific look on his face in 12 years. It did not make her feel better. It made her feel worse in a way she could not explain. She went to bed in her old room, which still had the same faded quilt, and lay with the ceiling above her and the sound of the house settling, and thought about a company that gave houses back to families and called it a restoration initiative. She thought about her father standing upright. She thought about a name she had not let herself think about in a very long time. By 7 in the morning, she was up, dressed, and walking toward the foundry. The Blackridge Foundry had not looked like this when she left. She stood outside the main entrance and took it in. The building itself was structurally the same. The old brick facade, the tall windows, the smokestack that had become a landmark, but everything around it had been reworked. New lighting along the perimeter. The loading area had been repaved. A small parking area with actual painted lines. A plaque beside the front entrance that she walked up to read. Blackridge Foundry, Est, 1891. Restored and reopened under community partnership, 2023. In recognition of the workers and families who built this town. She read it twice, then she walked inside. The reception desk was staffed by a woman in her 50s named Doreen, who told Elara the offices were on the second floor, and yes, the director was in. And no, she didn't need an appointment. He took walk-ins before 9. The director's name, according to the small placard on the office door, was listed only as D. Crosswell. Elara's hand stopped 2 inches from the door. She stood in the hallway for 8 seconds. Then she knocked. "Come in." The voice was deeper than she remembered. Older, measured in a way the boy's voice had never been. But she knew it, the way she knew certain things that lived in the body, rather than the mind not remembered so much as recognized. She opened the door. He was standing at the window with his back to her, looking down at the foundry floor through the glass. Tall, dark coat, the same broad line of his shoulders she remembered, grown into something different, more deliberate, less restless. He turned. Damian Crosswell was 33 years old and looked like someone had taken every difficulty of the last 15 years and built a face out of it. Not ugliness, the opposite. The kind of face that had been through something and knew it. Dark eyes that didn't give much away. The faint line of a scar along his jaw that hadn't been there before. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. She looked back. "You bought my parents' house," she said. No hello, no preamble. She was a conservator. She went straight to the damage. Damian was quiet for 2 full seconds. Then, "Sit down, Elara." "I don't want to sit down. I want an explanation." "You can have one. Sit down anyway." She sat, mostly because her legs were less steady than she wanted them to be. He came away from the window and took the chair across from her. Not the desk chair, not behind the authority of the desk, but the chair across the small table in the corner of the office. Like a conversation between equals, or an attempt at one. "Your parents were going to lose that house," he said. They were 4 months behind. The bank had already started the process. "I know that now. I didn't know it before last night. They didn't want you to know. So instead you just bought it? Gave it back? And what? They owe you forever now." "They owe me nothing." He said it without heat, matter of fact. The deed transfer was clean and permanent. There are no conditions attached to it. No debts. "People don't do that," she said. "Not without conditions." "Most people don't. I did." "Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because they deserved to keep their home. Because your father spent 22 years building something for this town and lost it through no failure of his own. And the idea that he should spend his 60s losing his house on top of that was something I could fix." "You could fix," she repeated. "Because of what? Because of the Crosswell organization? Because you run a criminal empire and you wanted to do a good deed in the town where you grew up?" Something moved across his face. Not hurt, not exactly. The carefully managed expression of a man who had learned not to let things show, and was, for this particular conversation, choosing not to manage it. "It's more complicated than that," he said. Then uncomplicate it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at his hands for a moment. Then back at her. Ironvale Holdings is real, he said. It's a legitimate investment company. The work it does here is legitimate. I control it. Yes, and yes, the seed money came from parts of my organization that aren't something I'm going to defend to you right now. But the work, the jobs, your father's position, those are not fiction. I didn't manufacture any of it. You manufactured the circumstances. I created an opportunity. Your father decided to take it. Every worker in this building decided to show up. I didn't put words in their mouths or fake their paychecks. Elara sat back. Her hands were in her lap, and she was gripping her own fingers without realizing it. Why Ravenmere Falls, she said. The question sat between them. Damian was quiet for long enough that she almost repeated it. You know why, he said. She had known. She had known in the train station, looking at the repainted benches. She had known walking through the front door of her parents' house, looking at the new porch boards. She had known it and refused to look at it directly, the way you refused to look directly at something that would change the shape of everything if you acknowledged it. Don't, she said. Elara, don't tell me this is about me. It's not only about you, he said it carefully, but you're part of it. You were always part of it. The town that made you matters to me because you matter to me. That hasn't changed. She stood up. I need you to understand something, she said. I left this town when I was 20 because I had to. I built a career and a life by myself, with no one's help, and I did it deliberately because I didn't want to owe anyone anything, and I didn't want anyone to be able to reach into my life and rearrange it. And you, without asking me, without telling me, you rearranged my entire family's life. You fixed things. You helped people. And I'm supposed to what? Be grateful? He didn't answer immediately. No, he said finally. Not grateful. Never grateful. I don't want that. Then what do you want? The question came out harder than she intended. Raw in a way she hadn't meant to let it be. Damian looked at her. I want the chance to explain, he said. Everything. Not just the house. Not just Ironvale, all of it. From the beginning. Elara picked up her coat from the chair where she draped it. You have until this afternoon, she said. My mother's birthday dinner is at 6. I'm not missing it. She walked out of the office and down the stairs and back out into the cold morning, and her hands were shaking, and she did not stop walking until she was 3 blocks away and standing in front of a coffee shop. She had never been inside because it hadn't existed the last time she was here. She went in. She ordered coffee black and sat at a table by the window. The town moved past outside. Workers heading toward the foundry. A woman unlocking the door of a small bookshop across the street. 2 men in coveralls coming out of the hardware store with something heavy between them, talking and laughing about whatever you talked and laughed about on an ordinary Tuesday. None of them knew who owned the building they were walking past. None of them knew who had made it possible for that bookshop to stay open. Elara wrapped her hands around her cup and stared at the street and felt the particular anger of someone who had been protected from something they had a right to know about. And underneath that anger, beneath it like a buried layer in an old painting, something much more complicated that she was not ready to name. She drank her coffee. She was going back at 1 o'clock. She was back at 1 o'clock exactly. Not because she was punctual by habit she was, but that wasn't the reason. She was back because she had spent the 3 hours between the coffee shop and now walking through Ravenmere Falls with her eyes open, and what she had seen had made the anger in her chest more complicated rather than simpler. And she needed it resolved one way or the other before she could sit across a dinner table from her parents and pretend she was just a daughter home for a birthday. The foundry was quieter in the early afternoon. The morning shift had settled into its rhythm. She walked past the reception desk with a nod at Doreen, who waved her through with the casual authority of someone who had been told to expect her, and climbed the stairs without stopping. Damian was at his desk this time, working or something that looked like working papers spread, a laptop open, a phone face down to his right. He looked up when she came in and didn't say anything about her being exactly on time. He closed the laptop. Sit, he said. You said that this morning. It worked this morning. She sat. He got up and went to the credenzas along the far wall and came back with a manila folder, which he set on the table between them without opening it. Everything Ironvale has done in Ravenmere Falls is in there, he said. Property acquisitions, deed transfers, employment records, business loans. All of it. You can take it with you, have someone verify it, do whatever you need to do. I'm not asking you to take my word for anything. Elara looked at the folder, then at him. Why does it matter to you whether I believe you? Because you're the one person I don't want to lie to. She pulled the folder toward her but didn't open it. Start from the beginning, not from Ironvale, from before. He sat back. He was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone organizing not their thoughts but their honesties, deciding how much of it to let out at once. My father died when I was 18, he said. You know that part. I know he died. I don't know what happened after. After. He said the word like it was its own sentence. After I found out what my father actually was, what he'd built, what he ran. I knew. Pieces of it. You grow up in that family. You know something is different about your house, about why certain people visit, about why your father never worried about money, but also never talked about where it came from. But I didn't know the scope of it, not until the lawyers sat me down after the funeral. Elara said nothing. She waited. The organization didn't stop operating because he died, Damian said. Kept moving, and someone had to be at the head of it, or it would have come apart in a way that got a lot of people killed, including people I'd known since I was a kid. I was 18. I didn't have a choice that felt like a choice. Everyone has a choice. You're right, he said. I could have walked away. A sound like green wood splitting, and 4 men who had been loyal to my father for dead within a month. Because there were people waiting to move on the organization the moment it looked leaderless. So yes, I had a choice. I made it. She absorbed that. She didn't like it, but she absorbed it. Why didn't you contact me? She said. After the funeral, after all of it, I was 17. I didn't understand why you just disappeared. Something crossed his face. Fleeting. The kind of expression that lived below the surface management and occasionally broke through despite everything. Because I was scared, he said. She hadn't expected that word from him. Not this version of him. I was scared, he said again, like he was making himself say it a second time. Of what I was becoming, of what I was going to have to do. And I thought if I stayed connected to you, to your family, to anything in this town that was clean, I was going to drag all of it into something it didn't belong in. You were going to go to college. You were going to do something real with your life. And I was going to spend the next decade managing a criminal organization and hoping nobody decent got close enough to get hurt. That wasn't your decision to make, Elara said. What I got hurt by. That wasn't yours. I know that now. Did you know it then? He looked at her. No, he said. I thought I was protecting you. She put both hands flat on the folder in front of her and breathed. There's something else, he said. She looked up. He got up and went to the filing cabinet in the corner. He opened the bottom drawer, and from the back of it, he withdrew a smaller envelope, not a file folder, just a standard envelope, slightly yellowed, with a Boston postmark from 12 years ago. He set it on the table. Elara recognized her own handwriting on the front. The room shifted. You kept it, she said. It was returned to me, he said. I never received it. I was moving. The organization had relocated me for security, and the forwarding address I'd given my father's lawyer was outdated. By the time I had a permanent address, your letter had already come back. She stared at her own handwriting. The way she'd written his name, the careful letters of a 17-year-old who had practiced it twice on a scratch sheet before writing the real one. Did you read it? She said. No. He sat back down. It came back sealed. I kept it because he stopped. I kept it. Elara reached out and touched the edge of the envelope. Not to pick it up, just to confirm it was real. I wrote that letter the week after your father's funeral, she said. I told you I said that. Whatever happened, whatever you were going through, I wanted you to tell me. That I wasn't going anywhere. She paused. I waited 3 months for you to respond. Damian's jaw tightened. Not anger. Something harder than anger to watch in a person, the expression of someone processing a grief they can't do anything about because its source is 12 years gone. I wrote back, he said. She looked at him. I wrote a letter. 8 months after yours was returned to me, I finally wrote one. I didn't send it. He opened the same bottom drawer, and this time brought out a second envelope. This one had never been addressed. The flap was still sealed with its original strip. I drafted it 4 times. I mailed the others to a P.O. box I used, just to make them leave my hands. But the last one I never sent. He slid it across the table toward her. She didn't touch it. What does it say? She asked. Read it. Tell me what it says. He was quiet. Then that I was sorry, that I had no right to disappear without explaining. That I thought about. He stopped. He looked at the window for a moment. That I thought about you constantly, and that I was afraid if I reached out, whoever was watching me at the time would look at you, would track you, would know your name. Were people watching you? Yes. For how long? The first 4 years. Elara sat with that. 4 years of a young man making decisions from inside, a threat she hadn't known existed, hadn't been told about, hadn't had the chance to weigh in on. 4 years in which she had finished school, moved to Boston, started her career, and slowly, deliberately rebuilt herself into someone who did not need anyone to sustain her. Say what you're thinking, Damian said. I'm thinking, she said carefully, that every decision you made, disappearing, not contacting me, coming here, buying this foundry, helping my parents, every single one of them was made without asking me anything. Yes, you didn't disappear to protect me. You disappeared because you made a calculation. They're not different things. They are, she said. Because a calculation can be wrong. Because you were wrong. Because maybe I would have said, okay, I understand. I can wait. I can stay at a distance. I can be careful. Maybe I would have said all of that if you had given me the chance, and instead, you decided you already knew my answer. Damian didn't move. You're right, he said. I know I'm right. I said, you're right. His voice didn't rise. It stayed exactly where it was. I made the calculation. I was wrong. I have spent 15 years being right about almost every strategic decision I've ever made, and I was completely wrong about that one, and I know it. Elara stood up. She picked up the folder. She picked up the sealed letter, her own, the returned one, and left the one he'd written on the table. I'm going to look at these, she said, and then I'm going to talk to the people in this building. The workers. Not management. The people on the floor. I'll tell Doreen to give you access. I didn't ask for your permission. He didn't say anything. She walked out. The foundry floor was loud in a way that felt alive rather than oppressive, the controlled chaos of people who knew their jobs, the rhythm of machinery operating inside its tolerances, the particular kind of noise that meant work was actually happening rather than just being performed. A sound like green wood splitting. Elara had spent enough time in restoration workshops to know the difference between a place where people were moving through the hours and a place where people were engaged. This was the second kind. She spoke to 7 workers over the course of 90 minutes. She didn't announce herself as related to anyone or connected to anyone. She said she was a researcher working on a piece about community industrial revival. It wasn't entirely false. She was restoring something in her way. The workers were not all the same kind of person. A man named Roy had been at Blackridge since 1998 and had moved back from Cleveland when Ironvale reopened the facility. A woman named Sheila had started 6 months ago, just out of a technical training program that Ironvale had partially funded. A quiet young man named Marcus who ran one of the CNC machines and had clearly been doing it for long enough that he and the machine understood each other. She asked them about the company, about the ownership, about whether they felt any pressure or obligation from whoever was at the top. Roy said, honestly, I don't think about who owns it. I think about whether my paycheck clears and whether the work is real. Both of those things have been true every week for 2 years. Sheila said, I know they helped with my training program. I've never met anyone from the executive side. I get the sense there's someone important behind it, but the day-to-day management just feels like a company, a normal company, which is more than I can say for some places I've worked. Marcus said very little, but when she asked him directly whether he thought the company's support to the community came with strings, he looked at her for a moment and said, I grew up in this town. I watched it die. I don't know who saved it or why. I just know I have a job I'm good at and I can afford my apartment. That's what I'm focused on. She stood on the foundry floor after they drifted back to their stations and looked at the space around her. Her father's name was on a small plaque near the archive room. Caleb Whitmore, Heritage Consultant, Foundry Historical Record Project. She walked over to it and ran her finger across the letters. She stood there for a while. Then she took the stairs back up to the second floor. Damian was on the phone when she came back in, standing with his back to the door. He heard her and held up one finger without turning. "Give me 30 seconds." And she sat and waited. "No," he said into the phone. His voice had changed. The careful, measured tone he'd used with her was gone. This was a different gear entirely. Flat and final. "That's not a negotiation. Tell him the answer was no last week and it's no today. If he wants to push it, that's his problem to have. Not mine," he listened. "Then let it be his problem." He ended the call. He turned back to her. "Different voice," she said. "Different conversation. Is that what you sound like? When you're doing the other part?" He looked at her without being defensive about it. "Sometimes, when something needs to be clear." She set the folder back on the table. "I went through part of this on the floor. The employment records for the initial hire cohort. 31 people. I cross-referenced 6 of them against the town's housing assistance records from 2020. She paused. All 6 were people who had been flagged for potential foreclosure. "Yes, you targeted the people most at risk. Prioritized them for hiring." "Yes, and the business loans there are 14 here. Local businesses, most of them small. I recognize 3 of these names. The hardware store on Clement Street has been there since I was a kid. The bakery on Route 9. They were both 6 weeks from closing." Elara pressed her thumb against the edge of the folder. "This is a lot of people," she said. "A lot of families. 34, in total, between employment, housing, and business support." She looked up. 34, not including indirect effects. Jobs created by the businesses that stayed open. Kids who got to stay in the same school. She hated that she needed a moment. She had come back into this room ready to be exact and analytical, and now she was sitting across from a man who had quietly and systematically saved 36 families in the town where she grew up. And she needed a moment, and she resented needing it. "The workers I talk to," she said, "they don't feel controlled. They feel employed. There's a difference." "There is." "That doesn't mean what you did was clean," she said. "It doesn't mean you get to make decisions for people without their knowledge and call it generosity. I know that. You gave my father a job without telling him why. You gave my parents back their house without telling them who bought it. They would have refused both if they knew." "Yes," he said. "They would have. So you took the choice away from them." "I protected their dignity," he said. "There's a version of this where I walk up to your father's door and say, 'Hello, I'm Damian Crosswell. I run a criminal organization. I've also started a legitimate development company. Can I help your family?' And your father says no, and stays in financial freefall, and loses his house and his sense of himself. And I'm clean, transparent, and useless. That's a convenient argument. It's a true argument. Convenient things can be true," she said. "That doesn't make them right." She could see him controlling something. Not temper, something more complicated. The expression of a man who has had an argument inside himself for years and is now having it out loud for the first time. "You want me to say I was wrong," he said. "I want you to decide whether you actually believe you were." He was quiet. "Both things," he said finally. "Both things are true. What I did helped people who needed help, and I took away their right to know the truth of who was helping them. Both of those things exist at the same time, and I don't know how to resolve them." Elara stood up. "That's the most honest thing you've said today," she said. She picked up her coat. She took the folder. She left his letter on the table again. "I'll read mine tonight," she said, "the one I wrote. And then I'll decide what I want to say to you." She was almost to the door when he said her name. She stopped but didn't turn. "There's a collection," he said, "in the filing cabinet. 3rd drawer. You should know it exists." She turned then. His face was controlled, but something in his eyes was not. "A collection of what?" she said. "Your work," he said. "Articles you published. Papers. A review you got in the Art Conservation Quarterly in 2019. The piece in the Boston Globe about the Hartwell collection. Photographs of things you restored. He paused. I've followed your career since you started publishing. The room was very quiet. How long, she said. Since the first article. 2014. She had been 23 in 2014, just out of her master's program. The article had been a small thing, a piece in a regional journal about restoration methodology on 19th century American portraiture. She had been proud of it and also slightly embarrassed by its earnestness. Damian Crosswell had read it, had kept everything after it, apparently in a filing cabinet in an office in the town where she grew up, in a building he had rebuilt in part not entirely, but in part because of her. I need to go, she said. I know. She left. The cold outside hit her like a correction. She stood on the front steps of the foundry and breathed it in and did not move for almost a minute. In one afternoon, she confirmed that the man she had spent 12 years not thinking about had spent those same 12 years quietly arranging the world around the people she loved, and reading her articles, and keeping a letter he never sent, and running a criminal empire, and believing somehow, in the logic of a person who had survived by controlling outcomes, that all of it added up to something that looked like love. She walked back toward her parents' house. She was halfway down Clement Street when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Ms. Whitmore? A woman's voice, smooth, deliberate. The voice of someone who had learned to manage the temperature of a conversation before it began. My name is Victoria Crosswell. I think we should talk before you make any decisions about my brother. Elara stopped walking. How did you get this number? She said. I have access to most things I need, Victoria said. That's not the point. The point is that there's information about what Damian has done here and why that he won't tell you himself. Because he's not capable of being objective about you. He never has been, and you are? I'm the person who's been watching him make decisions about this town for 3 years, Victoria said. I'm the person who authorized the financial structures that made Iron Vale possible. And I'm the person who is currently sitting on documentation that shows exactly what percentage of his decision-making about Ravenmere Falls was driven by his feelings for you versus legitimate business development. The words landed in a particular way, not because they were necessarily true, but because they were exactly the question Elara had been turning over since this morning, and this woman had just put a number on it, a percentage, documentation, something that could be verified or weaponized, and that meant the question was no longer just something Elara was wrestling with privately. It was something someone else had already decided to use. What do you want? Elara said. To meet, Victoria said. Tonight, before the birthday dinner. I think an hour is all we need. Why would I meet with you? Because Victoria said, you're a woman who needs to know the truth about things before she can make peace with them. And right now you only have Damian's version. I have the other one. Elara stood in the middle of Clement Street with the cold moving around her and the hardware store across the road and the late afternoon light going gold on the old brick buildings. She thought about her father's plaque. She thought about 34 families. She thought about a filing cabinet with her entire career inside it. Where? She said. Victoria gave her an address. A hotel bar on the edge of town, the kind of place that catered to business travelers passing through. Neutral territory. Nowhere that meant anything to anyone in Ravenmere Falls. 6 o'clock, Victoria said. Before dinner. I'll be there at 5:30, Elara said. I don't like being maneuvered. A pause. Then something that might have been the beginning of a smile in Victoria Crosswell's voice. No. I can see why he respects you. The call ended. Elara stood still for another moment. Then she walked faster, because she needed to get back to her parents' house, and she needed to read the letter she had written at 17, and she needed to think very carefully about what it meant. That the most powerful woman in a criminal organization had just called her personal cell phone to offer her the truth about the man who had quietly rebuilt her family's life. She was almost to the front porch when she understood. Victoria hadn't called to help her. Victoria had called because she had something to gain. And the only thing Victoria Crosswell could gain from Elara Whitmore was leverage over Damian. Elara sat down on the porch, Steps the new board solid under her and put her face in her hands for just a moment. Not despair, not helplessness. The particular expression of a person who has just understood that they are standing in the middle of something much larger than a family secret and a rebuilt town, and that every move they make from this point forward is going to have consequences they cannot fully predict. She had walked into this weekend expecting a birthday dinner and a quiet 2 days. Instead, she was sitting on her parents' rebuilt porch, with a criminal organization's internal politics closing round her like a tide, and the only instrument she had ever been given for situations like this was the one she used in her work. Go slowly. Look at everything. Don't assume the damage you can see is the whole story. She sat there until the cold made her go inside. She read the letter at 4:15, sitting on the edge of her childhood bed, with the door closed and the house quiet below her. It was not long. That surprised her. She had imagined over the years that if Damian had ever explained himself, it would have been elaborate, a defense, an argument, a careful construction of justifications. Splitting. Instead, the letter was 2 pages, handwritten in the slightly cramped script of someone who had not written by hand much in the preceding years, and it said almost exactly what he had told her this afternoon, except rawer, less organized. The way things sounded when they came out of a person at 2 in the morning instead of across a table at 1 in the afternoon. He had written about his father, not about the organization, about the man. The specific things he missed. The way his father had made coffee, badly, every morning, without fail. The sound of him on the phone, which was a particular low murmur, Damian said he still sometimes heard in half sleep and woke reaching for before he remembered. He had written about the night he decided not to contact her. He had been sitting in a car outside a meeting with men twice his age who expected him to be something he was still figuring out how to become, and he had taken out his phone and started typing her name into a message. A sound like green wood splitting, and then he had seen one of the men watching him from the window of the building, and he had understood that his phone was not private, had probably not been private for weeks, and he had put it back in his pocket and not taken it out again that night. He had written, "I know this doesn't explain everything. I know there were 100 moments after that one where I could have found another way. I think I kept not finding them because I was afraid of what you would say if you knew who I was becoming. Afraid you would be right to say it. And at the end underlined once, not twice, if I ever have something to give you, I want to place it in your hands, not hide it behind something I built." Elara sat with the letter in her lap for a long time. Then she folded it, put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in the inner pocket of her coat. Not because she had decided anything, because it was his, and she wasn't ready to give it back yet, and she didn't want to leave it in a childhood bedroom where her mother might find it. She went downstairs and told her parents she had an errand to run before dinner. Her mother asked if she needed the car. She said no and walked the 6 blocks to the hotel. Victoria Crosswell was already there. She was sitting at a corner table with her back to the wall and signs of sachint of her who had spent years learning how to be in a room and leave nothing to chance. Late 40s, immaculate in a way that didn't look effortful. Her resemblance to Damian was there if you looked for it, in the architecture of the face, but where his face had been weathered into something exposed and complicated, hers was composed. A finished surface. She watched Elara cross the room toward her and did not get up. "You're early," Victoria said. "I said I would be." Elara sat down without taking off her coat. "You have 30 minutes. I have a birthday dinner at 6. Victoria looked at her with something that might have been appreciation and might have been evaluation. "Damian said you were direct. Damian said things about me to you?" Not intentionally. She turned her glass on the table, a small rotation. "He talks. When he's making decisions, he talks through his reasoning out loud. I've been in enough of those conversations to know what he considers and what he dismisses. You are something he does not dismiss. You said you had documentation," Elara said, "about his decision-making on Ravenmere Falls." "I do." "Show me." Victoria reached into the bag beside her chair and set a tablet on the table, already open to a document. Elara pulled it toward her. It was a financial analysis. Internal, clearly the formatting was organizational, not something prepared for outside eyes. It showed the Iron Vale Holdings capital allocation across 3 years. The initial investment, the operating costs, the property acquisitions. The numbers were significant. Not ruinous for an organization of the Crosswell Syndicate's scale, but significant. At the bottom of the first page, a summary line, Ravenmere Falls Project ROI, negative 34% against original projections. Assessment non-viable as standalone investment. Elara looked up. Was never going to make money, she said. No, Victoria said. It was never structured to. The original Iron Vale mandate, and I helped design this mandate, I'm not distancing myself from it, was community development with a 20-year horizon. Return on investment was defined in terms of legitimization of assets and long-term community stability, not quarterly returns. That was always the plan. So what's your point? Victoria turned the tablet back toward herself and moved to the next page. This, she said, and turned it back. It was a memo, dated 18 months ago, from Damian to the Iron Vale board. It was about the Ravenmere Falls project, expansion, the third phase, which had included the business loans and the final property transfers. The memo was straightforward until the third paragraph. Elara read it twice. The third paragraph referenced a personal connection to the community as a factor in prioritizing the Ravenmere Falls expansion over 3 other projects that had been proposed for the same capital allocation. Personal connection to the community. He put it in a memo, she said. He put it in a memo, Victoria confirmed, which I have copies of. Which 3 other board members have seen. Which, if it reached the wrong people, and by wrong people, I mean the federal investigators who have been building a RICO case against the organization's financial structures for the past 2 years, would be a significant problem. The temperature in the room dropped. A RICO case, Elara said carefully. Ongoing. Nothing filed yet, but they're close. Victoria picked up her glass and held it without drinking. The danger for Damian is not the memo itself. The danger is what the memo implies. A sound scene. If federal investigators can demonstrate that his personal emotional connections influenced where Crosswell organization capital was deployed, that the community development projects were not genuinely independent from the syndicates. Decision-making, then the entire Iron Vale structure becomes suspect. Every property transfer, every business loan, every employment record. Elara felt something cold move through her, including my father's job. Including your father's job, Victoria said. Including the deed transfer on your parents' house. If those are characterized as assets moved through a criminally influenced financial structure, they can be clawed back. Reversed. The government does not need to prove your father did anything wrong. They just need to demonstrate the origin of the funds. And you're telling me this because Damian won't, Victoria said. Because he has decided, and this is consistent with every decision he has made about you for 15 years, that the correct approach is to manage the situation without burdening you with the full truth of it. He will find a way to insulate the Ravenmere Falls assets. He will probably succeed. But the process of doing that will require him to make moves that draw attention, and attention is something we cannot afford right now. Elara set the tablet down. Her hands were steady. She was making them be steady. What do you want from me? She said. Victoria put her glass down. I want you to leave, she said. Go back to Boston. Don't come back to Ravenmere Falls for 6 months. Make it clear, publicly, that your relationship with Damian is non-existent, that you confronted him today about the house and the job, and you want nothing to do with him or his company. Give me documentation of that position if you can. An email, a statement to someone credible, and that helps how? It breaks the narrative, Victoria said. Right now, the story that exists internally in the organization and increasingly in the business world is that Damian Crosswell rebuilt a small New England town because he was in love with a woman who grew up there. That story is damaging because it suggests his judgment is compromised. If you publicly walk away from him and from Ravenmere Falls, the story becomes, he tried to impress someone and it didn't work, and the project stands on its own merits. The personal element disappears. Elara looked at her. And your brother, she said. Does he know you're making this offer? No. Would he be angry if he did? Victoria met her eyes. Yes. Then why are you doing it? For the first time, something in Victoria's composed surface shifted. Not much. A fraction. The micro-expression of a person touching something they don't usually allow themselves to touch in a conversation like this. Because he will not protect himself, she said. He never has. Not when it involves someone he cares about. He would rather absorb every consequence than ask you to take any of them. And if he absorbs this one without neutralizing it, the federal case becomes a real problem for a lot of people. Not just him up. I need to think, she said. You have until tomorrow morning, Victoria said. I didn't agree to your timeline. The journalists don't know you're here yet, Victoria said. By tomorrow afternoon, they will. Someone in my organization already contacted 2 financial press outlets. I didn't authorize it, but I also can't stop it. Once your name is in the press, connected to Damian's, once there's a story about the woman, he rebuilt a town. For the federal investigators will look at you too. They'll look at your finances, your career, your father's employment. All of it. Elara stood very still. You leaked it, she said. Victoria's expression did not change. You called me today, Elara said. You framed this as giving me information Damian wouldn't. But you've already moved on this. You already contacted the journalists. This meeting isn't information, it's a warning. You're telling me the fire you started is coming, and I have until morning to get out of the building. Victoria picked up her glass. The offer stands, she said. Leave. Make a statement. Let Damian do what he needs to do without the complication of your presence. In 6 months, when the federal investigation shifts focus, you can reassess whatever you want to reassess. And the families? Elara said. The 34 families. If the federal case characterizes Ironvale as a criminal financial structure, what happens to their homes? Their jobs? Victoria looked at her for a long moment. That is Damian's problem to solve. You're his sister. And the organization's strategic director, Victoria said. In that capacity, the organization's survival takes priority over 34 families in a small town. Elara looked at the woman across the table, her composed face, her steady hands, her absolute clarity about what mattered and what didn't, and felt something that was not exactly hatred, but was close to it in temperature. She walked out without saying goodbye. The cold outside was worse than before, or she was less prepared for it. She stood on the sidewalk outside the hotel and looked at the street and tried to organize what she knew into something she could act on. Victoria had leaked information about Damian's connection to Ravenmere Falls to the press, possibly to federal investigators, or at minimum had done nothing to stop the leak from happening. She had then called Elara, framed it as a gesture of transparency, and made an offer that amounted to, disappear, and we can manage this. Stay, and you become the story that unravels everything. Including her father's job, including the deed on her parents' house, including 34 families, she walked. She did not walk toward home. She walked toward the foundry, which was closed at this hour, but still lit around the perimeter. She stood outside it and looked at the building and thought about the plaque beside the door. In recognition of the workers and families who built this town. She thought about Roy, who had moved back from Cleveland. She thought about Sheila, 2 years out of a technical program, learning her trade inside these walls. She thought about Marcus and his CNC machine and his apartment. She thought about what it meant to pull the foundation out from under something. She had spent her entire career trying to prevent exactly that. She took out her phone and called Damian. He picked up on the second ring. I just left your sister, she said. A beat of silence. Then where are you? Outside the foundry. Don't come out. I need you to listen. Tell me what she said, Elara told him. She laid it out in order, precisely, without editorializing, the way she cataloged damage in a restoration assessment. The memo, the federal case, the journalists, the offer. She kept her voice even, and she did not stop until she had said all of it. When she finished, Damian was quiet for 6 seconds. She counted. She leaked it, he said. She told you she leaked it? She didn't confirm it directly, but yes, she did. Another silence, different quality from the first. This one had weight in it, something being compressed. Go to your family, he said. Go to the birthday dinner. Don't talk to anyone from the press if they call tonight. I'll have someone send you a number to forward them to. Damian Elara, please. His voice cracked slightly on the second word. Not broke, cracked. The sound of a controlled surface under unexpected pressure. Let me handle this part. Go be with your family tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I'll have answers. What kind of answers? The kind that tell us whether any of this can be fixed. She looked at the foundry wall, the lit brick, the restored windows. If it can't be fixed, she started. I'll fix it, he said. That's the one thing I know how to do. She ended the call. She stood outside for another minute. Then she turned and walked toward the Whitmore house and the birthday dinner and her mother's face and the particular task of sitting at a table with people you love while carrying something you cannot yet say. The dinner was both easier and harder than she expected. Easier because her mother was happy. Vivian Whitmore turned 60, with the energy of someone who had decided the number was irrelevant and the evening was the point. She had made the things she liked: pot roast, roasted potatoes, a salad nobody would eat much of, and a chocolate cake from the bakery on Route 9 that Elara now knew had been 6 weeks from closing 18 months ago. Harder because Elara sat at that table and watched her parents and thought about the word clawback in the same breath as the house they were sitting inside of, and she had to perform normalcy across a 2-hour dinner with the performance muscles of someone who had not practiced it yet in a while. Her father talked about the archive project. He had found records going back to 1,894 dreding, 194 ledgers from the original foundry management, handwritten timesheets, a photograph of the original floor crew that he was in the process of getting professionally restored. He looked at Elara when he said the word restored and grinned. Right up your alley, he said. Send me a scan, she said. I can take a look. She ate and laughed at the right moments, and helped her mother blow out the candles and did not look at her phone until she was washing dishes in the kitchen alone. After her father had fallen asleep in his chair and her mother had gone upstairs. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. Not Victoria's number, different unknown. Press, probably. 1 text from a number she didn't recognize, which read, forward media inquiries to this number. D, and 1 email which had come in 40 minutes ago from a journalist at the Financial Chronicle Fable she had never heard of. Request for comment, Crosswell, Ravensmere, Falls, Whitmore connection. Her name was already in it. She stood at the kitchen sink, with her hands still slightly damp, and read the email twice. The journalist had her work email address, which was on her professional website, which was publicly accessible. That was not surprising. What was surprising was the level of detail in the email itself. The journalist knew about the house deed transfer, knew about Caleb's position at the foundry, knew that Elara had been at the foundry today and had spoken with Damian directly, knew that her family's property had been acquired and returned by Iron Vale Holdings. The email characterized the situation as follows. Sources indicate that Damian Crosswell, head of the Crosswell organization and controlling partner of Iron Vale Holdings, directed significant organizational resources toward a small Massachusetts town with documented ties to a personal relationship, raising questions about the separation between criminal enterprise finances and the community development activities the company has publicly claimed as independent. Ms. Whitmore, as a central figure in this situation, your perspective would be valuable. Central figure. She was a conservator from Boston who had come home for her mother's birthday. She forwarded the email to the number Damian had sent and went upstairs and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark. She thought about what Victoria had said. The offer. Leave, make a statement, let it dissolve. She thought about what that would mean. A sound like green wood splitting. Her father's face at dinner, talking about the archive project, with the light of someone who had been given back something they thought was gone. Her mother's voice in the car, things have picked up. Roy back from Cleveland. Sheila learning a trade. Marcus in his apartment. She thought about herself. A self-trigger, because she had to think about herself too, and she had spent enough years in professional environments to know that having her name attached to a federal financial investigation was not something that dissolved easily. Her career ran on institutional trust museums, private collectors, historical foundations. They hired conservators who were above reproach, who were careful, who did not have their names in articles about criminal enterprises. Even tangentially, even innocently, even if she had done nothing. She lay down on top of the quilt and looked at the ceiling. She had walked into this town 48 hours ago with her restoration case and a plan to get through a weekend. She was leaving with her family's home potentially at legal risk, her name in the financial press and the knowledge that a woman she had once in a hotel bar had just detonated something she could feel, but not yet see the full shape of. She thought about the principle she lived by in her work. Never judge a damaged object before examining what exists beneath the surface. She had been applying it to Damian since she arrived. Examining, being precise, not accepting the surface version. She had not been applying it to Victoria. She sat up. Victoria had called her before the journalists called her. Victoria had offered her an exit before she knew she needed one. Victoria had positioned herself as a truth teller, as a corrective to Damian's omissions, but she had done all of this in a 40-minute window on the evening before the story was going to break. That wasn't generosity, that was staging. Victoria had not called to protect Elara. She had called to make sure Elara was frightened and positioned before the real move landed, so that when the press reached out, Elara would be primed to do exactly what Victoria wanted. Make a statement. Distance herself. Take herself out of the picture. Remove the complication, because Elara was not the story Victoria was trying to control. Damian was. And if Elara was a liability, if her presence in Ravenmere Falls, her history with Damian, her family's connection to Ironvale could be used to destabilize him, then Victoria did not want that liability neutralized because she cared about Elara. She wanted it neutralized because a destabilized Damian made decisions Victoria couldn't predict. Elara got off the bed. She went to the window and looked out at the street. The oak tree, the neighbor's porch light, the new curb they'd poured on Millhaven Street that she hadn't noticed until just now. She thought about what Damian had said. That's the one thing I know how to do. And then she thought about what Victoria had not said. Victoria had told her the memo existed, had told her about the federal case, had told her the journalists were already moving, but she had not told her why, the actual reason behind it. Why now? Why this week when Elara happened to be in town? Why a leak that had apparently been sitting in Victoria's control for months had suddenly moved the moment Damian spent a morning in a room with Elara. Because Victoria hadn't leaked it because of the federal case. She had leaked it because Damian had spent a morning with Elara. And whatever that meant for the organization's strategic positioning, for Victoria, it meant something simpler and more territorial. Her brother, the head of the Crosswell syndicate, had been visibly and significantly affected by a woman's return to his life. And in Victoria's architecture of power, that was not a romantic problem. That was a structural vulnerability. Elara pressed her hand against the cold window glass. She understood now. She was not the collateral damage in Victoria's move against Damian. She was the weapon, and Victoria had just handed her the detonator and told her it was a gift. She picked up her phone. She did not call Damian. She opened her laptop, and she started reading everything she could find about Ironvale Holdings, the Crosswell organization's public-facing structures, and the Financial Chronicle journalist who had emailed her. Because she was a woman who had spent her adult life learning how to look at a damaged thing with precision before she touched it, and she was not going to let Victoria Crosswell's timeline be the one that governed what happened next. She read until 2 in the morning, and then she made a decision that had nothing to do with leaving. She was at the Foundry at 7:15 in the morning. Not because Damian had asked her to come. He hadn't. She had not called him after 2 in the morning when she finished reading, and she had not called him at 6 when she woke up after 4 hours of something that was adjacent to sleep but not quite it. She had gotten dressed in the dark, written a note for her mother that said errands, back by noon, and walked out into a morning that was gray and sharp and smelled like incoming rain. The security guard at the Foundry entrance was a young man she hadn't seen before. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and she said, "I need to see Damian Crosswell." And he said, "He's not taking visitors this morning." And she said, "Tell him Elara Whitmore is here, and that I have information about his sister that he needs before 9 o'clock. The guard made a call. He listened, he stepped aside. She went up. Damian was in his office, but it looked like he had been in it all night. His jacket was off, hung over the back of the desk chair with the precision of someone who had removed it hours ago and not put it back on. There was a coffee cup that had been empty long enough to leave a ring on the table. His phone was face up, screen dark, in the center of the desk, where someone put a thing they needed to see the moment it moved. He looked at her when she came in, and something in his expression shifted, not relief exactly, but the particular loosening of a person who has been braced for something bad and has briefly been given a stay of execution. "You didn't leave," he said. "No," Victoria said. "I know what Victoria said." Elara sat down and put her laptop on the table and opened it. "I spent 4 hours last night reading. Talk to me about the federal case." He came around the desk and sat across from her. He did not look surprised that she knew. He looked like a man recalculating. 2-year RICO investigation, he said, focused on the organization's financial structures. They've been building toward the Iron Veil connection, trying to demonstrate that the community development projects were funded by criminal enterprise proceeds rather than legitimately separated capital. Are they right? A beat. The original seed capital had origins they could characterize that way, he said. The operational finances since year 2 are clean. But the original transfer, they're not wrong about what it was. How close are they? Close enough that I've had lawyers on it for 6 months. And the memo Victoria showed me. He closed his eyes briefly. 1 second, then open again. How did she get it? She's on the Iron Veil board. She shouldn't have access to internal executive communications. She does. Elara turned the laptop toward him. She had pulled up the Iron Veil Holdings corporate registration documents, which were publicly filed in Delaware, and cross-referenced them with the board composition listed in the organization's state filing. She's listed as a strategic advisor with board observation rights. That language is broad enough to cover internal memos if she argued for it, and from what I've seen of your sister, she would have argued for it from the beginning. Damian looked at the screen. His jaw tightened. "She's been building this for a while," Elara said. "This isn't a reaction to me coming back. This is she had the memo. She had the journalist contacts. She had my phone number. This was prepared. She was waiting for a trigger." "You," he said. "Me. My arrival gave her a deadline." If she was going to move on this, she needed to move before whatever was developing between you and me became something she couldn't characterize as a liability. If we reached some kind of understanding, then your judgment stops looking compromised. You stop being manageable. Damian was looking at her steadily. "You figured all of this out last night," he said. "I had 4 hours and no sleep and a very specific kind of anger," she said. "Yes. What do you want to do?" "I want to ask you something first." She closed the laptop. "The journalist who emailed me, he had details that weren't public, the deed transfer, my father's position, the fact that I was here and had met with you. Could he have gotten those from the federal investigation? From a leak inside the investigation?" Damian was quiet for a moment. "Possibly. The investigators have been building a file. If someone inside leaked to the press, or Victoria leaked directly to the investigators and they leaked to the press," Elara said, "which would be worse for you, because then the press story and the federal case are moving simultaneously, and each one feeds the other." "Yes. Is that what's happening?" He picked up his phone, looked at it, put it back down. "I've had 3 calls this morning from people inside the organization, telling me the Financial Chronicle story is going to run today. Online edition, mid-morning. It's going to name me. Iron Veil, Ravenmere Falls, and you." Elara absorbed that. "Okay," he repeated. Like the word didn't make sense in this context. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I'm not making a statement. I'm not doing what Victoria wants. But I need you to do something. Tell me. Call a meeting. This morning. Your board, your lawyers, and your sister. All in the same room, and I need to be there." He looked at her. "Elara, I know what I'm asking. You don't. If you're in that room, you're part of this. You become officially connected to the organization in a way that—" "I'm already in the journalist's story," she said. "My name is already in a federal investigations file, probably. The choice to stay out of this ended yesterday, when Victoria made that call." She looked at him without flinching. "I'm a conservator. I know how to document damage. I know how to trace the origin of a fracture. That's what we need right now, someone who can look at this clearly and establish what actually happened versus what Victoria is framing as what happened. And I can do that. Damian looked at her for a long time. She could see him working through it. Not reluctance calculation. The same thing he always did, probably. Mapping consequences, measuring risk, finding the safest path through. Except this time she was watching him do it, and she was the variable that kept appearing in every path. If I put you in that room, he said slowly, you are not protected by me. I can't whatever happens in there. I can't control how it affects you afterward. I know your career, Damian. She said his name the way you said something to stop a machine. I spent 12 years building a career that no one could touch. I did it alone, deliberately, specifically, so that I would not be vulnerable to anyone else's decisions. And I am sitting here telling you that I am choosing this. I am choosing to be in that room. That is my decision. Do not take it from me. He stopped. He breathed out. All right, he said. I'll make the calls. The meeting was at 9:30. There were 7 people in the conference room on the 3rd floor. Damian, Elara, 2 lawyers, whose names Elara caught as Mercer and Lane, the Ironvale CFO, a man from the organization's internal security apparatus named Voss, who said nothing for the first 20 minutes and watched everything, and Victoria. Victoria arrived last. She came through the door and she saw Elara, and she stopped for 1 full second, the fractional pause of a person recalibrating, and then she sat down at the end of the table with the composed face of someone who had not been surprised, even though she had. Interesting choice, she said, looking at her brother. She stays, Damian said. I wasn't asking. We're about to. The lawyers exchanged a look. The CFO looked at his notes. Voss looked at the wall. Damian put both hands flat on the table. The Financial Chronicle story runs in approximately 2 hours. It names me, Ironvale Holdings, and Elara Whitmore in connection with the suggestion that criminal enterprise finances were used to influence a personal relationship. We need to address 3 things before that story publishes: the federal investigation, the memo, and the source of the leak. Mercer, the taller of the 2 lawyers, opened his folder. We've been in contact with the investigative team since 6 this morning. They are not behind the press leak. Their postures is that this is premature and potentially interferes with their case strategy. The leak came from inside the organization, Damian said. The room went still. Victoria's face did not move. We know this, Damian continued, because the specific details in the journalist's possession, the internal memo language, the Whitmore property transfer details, the date of yesterday's meeting at this foundry, are not in any federal file. They are in internal Ironvale documents, and in one case, in a private communication between board members. He looked at Victoria. She looked back at him. Say what you're saying, she said. I'm saying it. Then say it with your whole chest, Damian. Don't imply. You leaked the story, he said. You contacted the journalists. You gave them the memo and the property records. And then you called Elara and offered her an exit before the story broke, so that she would be frightened enough to do what you wanted before she had time to think through why you were calling. Victoria did not blink. And you can prove this, Voss, Damian said. The man named Voss opened a folder of his own. He did not make a speech. He laid 3 printed documents on the table and slid them toward the center. Phone records from yesterday afternoon. 3 calls to the personal mobile of the Financial Chronicle's deputy editor. From a number registered to an Ironvale corporate account assigned to the Strategic Advisory Division. Victoria looked at the document. She looked at them with the calm of someone who had known this was possible and had decided to absorb it. You've been monitoring my communication, she said. I've been monitoring organizational communications, Damian said, as I have a right to do. You're my brother. You're a board member who leaked privileged organizational information to the press during an active federal investigation, Damian said. His voice was entirely flat, not angry, something colder than anger, the tone of someone who has passed through feeling something and come out the other side of it into pure function. That is not a family conversation. That is an organizational crisis. Victoria sat back. She looked at Elara then, not with hatred. Seps, with something more precise than that, the assessment of someone who has lost a move and is already thinking about the next one. You put this together, Victoria said. I noticed the framing, Elara said. You called me before the journalist did. You gave me information Damian hadn't. You offered me an exit with a deadline. That's not transparency. That's stage management. It was also genuinely good advice, Victoria said. You leaving would have contained the damage. To the organization, Elara said. Not to the families in this town. Those are the same thing right now. No, Elara said. They're not. And that's the distinction you keep collapsing. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked back at Damian. What happens now, she said. It was not a question. Damian looked at his lawyer. Mercer cleared his throat. The organization's position with the federal investigation is strengthened, not weakened, by demonstrating that the leak was internal and unauthorized. It supports the argument that Iron Vale's community development activities were conducted independently of organizational direction and that any memo language connecting personal motivations to business decisions reflects individual judgment rather than organizational policy. In other words, Victoria said, you use my betrayal to clean your own record. In other words, Damian said, the work this company has done in this town stands on its own, and I'm going to protect it by sacrificing me, by telling the truth about what you did. Victoria stood up. She did it slowly, with the control of someone who would not give the room the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. She picked up her bag. She looked at Damian. I did this for the organization, she said. I did this because you have spent 3 years making decisions with your heart instead of your head, and someone had to stop it before it cost us everything. You did this because you couldn't control it, Damian said. That's not the same thing. Something finally moved in Victoria's face. Something old and complicated and not entirely without pain. She's going to cost you more than you think, she said. She didn't look at Elara when she said it. She kept looking at her brother. Not because she's bad, because you're different around her. You always were, and different is dangerous in what we do. Then maybe, Damian said, what we do needs to change. Victoria left. The door closing behind her was not a slam. It was worse than that, it was careful, controlled. The exit of a woman who had not given up, only changed position. The room breathed. Mercer said, we need to prepare a statement for the press. Something that addresses the story before it runs, establishes the organizational separation, and protects the Ravenmere Falls assets legally. Damian looked at Elara. She was already thinking. The statement needs to come from Iron Vale, she said. Not from Damian personally. And it should lead with the community, not with the investigation. 34 families. Specific numbers. Employment figures. Property transfers documented and completed. Make the story about the town, not about the man. And your name? Mercer asked. My name is the story, regardless, she said. I'd rather it be in the context of the conservator who examined the work and found it legitimate, not the woman the mob boss was in love with. Lane, the second lawyer, looked up. Are you prepared to make a formal statement to that effect? Elara looked at Damian. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read, something at the intersection of gratitude and guilt, and something else that had no clean name. Yes, she said, but the statement is mine. I write it. No one edits it for optics. Agreed, Damian said. And I want to talk to the federal investigators myself, she said. Not through lawyers, directly. As a witness to the community work, I can speak to the employment records, the property transfers, the workers I spoke with. I can testify to what I saw, Elara, Damian said. That puts you directly in the middle of a federal investigation. I'm already in the middle of it, she said. The difference is whether I'm there as a passive name in a file or as someone who can say what actually happened here. The lawyers looked at each other. It's unusual, Mercer said carefully. Good, she said. Unusual is harder to frame. Damian stood up. He said to the lawyers, give us 10 minutes. The lawyers and the CFO and the silent Voss gathered their things and went out, and the room was quiet, and it was just the two of them. He looked at her across the table. You don't have to do this, he said. You keep saying that. I keep meaning it, Damian. She stood up and came around the table toward him. Not all the way, just enough that she wasn't shouting across a conference table. I spent this entire visit being angry at you for making decisions without asking me. I am not going to be the kind of person who complains about that and then makes my own unilateral decisions without telling you why. And why? She looked at him. Because those families deserve to keep what they have, she said. Because my father deserves to keep his job. Because 34 people who never did anything wrong should not lose their homes because your sister decided to use me as a weapon against you. She paused. And because I am not running from this, I was raised in this town. I know these people. If there is something I can do to protect them, I am going to do it. That has nothing to do with you. He looked at her for a long moment. Only part of it has nothing to do with me, he said. Only part of it, she agreed. They held that for a moment, the honest version of something that neither of them was ready to name out loud yet. Then Damian's phone went off. He looked at the screen and his expression changed. The particular change of a man receiving information he expected, but didn't want. The story ran early, he said. Elara's stomach dropped. He turned the phone toward her. The Financial Chronicle online edition. The headline read, Crosswell Empire's Secret Heart, How a Mafia Billionaire Rebuilt a Town and Why. Her name was in the second paragraph. Her phone started ringing. She looked at the screen. Her director at the Boston Conservation Institute. She felt the floor shift under her, not literally, but in the way of a consequences they prepared for have arrived and are larger than they project. She looked at Damian. I have to take this, she said. Take it, she answered. Dr. Voss. She used the name without thinking about how strange it was that the federal investigator and her director shared it. Yes, I saw it. I can explain. She stopped, listened. Her face went carefully still. I understand, yes. I'll call you this afternoon. She ended the call. What? Damian said. My director is suspending my active project assignments pending review, she said. The Hartwell Collection. The museum has 2 major institutional clients. They've already called this morning. James's expression did what a controlled face did when something hit it, that it wasn't ready for not collapse, but the micro shift of a person absorbing impact. Elara, don't, she said, not harshly, just don't. I knew this was possible. I said I was choosing this. Your career is mine to risk, she said. Are you ready to make the statement? He stared at her. Are you ready, she said again, to make the statement? Yes, he said. Then let's get the lawyers back in here. She called the lawyers. She sat back down at the conference table. She pulled her laptop back open and she started writing, and her hands were entirely steady, and her career was suspended pending review, and her name was in a national financial publication connected to a criminal organization. And she wrote every word of her statement with the precision of someone who had spent 15 years learning how to restore things that other people had decided were beyond saving. Because that was what she knew how to do. And right now, it was the most dangerous and necessary thing she had. By 11:30, 3 things had happened in rapid succession, each one landing before the previous one had time to fully resolve. The Financial Chronicle published a follow-up post, citing Ironvale's official statement which Elara had drafted and Damian had released without alteration, and the tone of the coverage shifted from accusatory to uncertain. The way coverage shifted when a story got more complicated than its original frame. The Federal Investigator's Office issued a terse statement indicating that the leak of investigative adjacent materials to the press was itself under review. And Victoria Crosswell's formal resignation from the Ironvale board arrived in Damian's email at 11:44 lines. No explanation beyond strategic differences. Damian forwarded it to Mercer without comment. He came to find Elara in the archive room, where she had gone after the statement was sent because she's somewhere quieter than the conference room, and the archive room had her father's handwriting on the index cards, and for some reason that helped. He stood in the doorway. She was sitting at the work table with a photograph in her hands, one of the original Foundry crew. Photographs her father had been restoring. Black and white. 20 men in work clothes, squinting against a bright day, sometime in the early part of the last century. Victoria resigned from the board, he said. I know. I saw the forward. She's not gone, he said. She'll reposition. Find another angle. This isn't finished with her. I know that too. He came into the room and sat on the edge of the work table. Not across from her. beside her, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him. Your project suspension, he said. Don't, Elara. I said, don't. I'll handle it. She set the photograph down. My director is careful, not cruel. When the investigation resolves and the story has more context, I'll make my case. The work I've done stands on its own record. She looked at the photograph. Same as these workers. He was quiet. She could feel him looking at her profile. You're angry, he said. About which part? All of it. You're allowed to be. I know I'm allowed to be, she said. I'm choosing what to do with it. That's different. He reached out and picked up one of the index cards her father had made, careful handwriting, precise dates, names of workers from 1922. He held it for a moment. I used to think, he said, that the way to protect someone was to absorb everything before it reached them. Handle it, fix it, make it so they never had to feel the impact. I know, she said. It doesn't work, he said. No. Because when the impact comes anyway, and it always does, they haven't been given the chance to prepare for it. Or to choose whether they want to. He put the index card down. I understand that now. I understood it before I understood it, if that makes sense. I understood it in the letter I wrote and never sent. She looked at him. He was looking at the photograph. What are you going to do? She said. About the organization. About the federal case. Cooperate, he said. Fully. The lawyers have been advising against it for 6 months. But the only way to demonstrate that Iron Veil is genuinely separate from the organization's criminal activities is to open every record and let them see it. If we have nothing to hide, we show them we have nothing to hide. That's going to be painful. Yes, there are going to be parts of the organizational records that are not clean. Yes, and those parts I'll answer for. But Ravenmere Falls, what happened here that stands, he said it, with the certainty of someone who had made a decision in the night and was now simply living inside it. I'll transfer the foundry into a community trust. Formally, completely. Workers and local representatives control it. The organization has no claim on it. She looked at him for a long moment. Victoria will try to use that against you, she said. Inside the organization. Giving up the foundry, cooperating with federal investigators, there will be people who see that as weakness. I know. Are you ready for that? He looked at her. Are you? He said. It was not an accusation. It was what it looked like when someone who had spent 15 years making unilateral decisions finally genuinely asked someone else the question. She held it. Outside, she could hear the foundry floor, the rhythm of the machinery, the particular alive sound of people at work. Roy, back from Cleveland. Sheila, learning her trade. Marcus and his machine. Her father's handwriting on index cards in a room built to keep memory from disappearing. Ask me again tomorrow, she said. Why tomorrow? Because today I'm still angry, she said. And I don't want to answer something that important from inside this much anger. He nodded. Outside, someone on the foundry floor called out to someone else a name, sharp and familiar, the ordinary sound of coworkers, and a second voice called back. And then there was laughter, brief and unself-conscious, the way people laughed when they were not performing it. Elara looked at the photograph in her hands. 20 men squinting against a bright day. None of them knowing what would be built on what they'd started. None of them knowing who would be left to remember. She set it down carefully, the way she set everything down that mattered, not releasing it, just placing it somewhere. It could be found again. Damian's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something shifted in his face. What? She said. He turned the phone toward her. It was a text from a number Shai didn't recognize, but the message was 3 words, and they landed in her chest like something dropped from a height. She went to them. Her eyes went up to his Victoria, he said. She's gone to the federal investigators. The air between them changed. Not panic. Something colder and more specific. Because Victoria Crosswell did not do things without strategy, and walking into a federal investigation was not surrender. It was the opening of a second front. One that Damian had not prepared for, because he had been watching the front that Elara had already helped him stabilize. Damian stood up. His face was the face of a man who had just understood that the war he thought he was winning had just expanded its theater, and that every resource he had committed to the current position needed to be reconsidered in the next 60 seconds. He looked at Elara, and for the first time since she had walked into his office 2 days ago, she saw something in his eyes that he had not shown her before. Not fear. The thing that came before fear in a person who had been trained not to feel it, the split second of absolute clarity when the ground shifts, and the body knows, before the mind does, that everything is about to change. I need to make a call, he said. Go, she said. He went. She sat alone in the archive room, with the photograph of 20 men who had built something that outlasted every expectation anyone had for it, and she pressed her hands flat on the work table, and she breathed a sound like green wood splitting, and she thought about what it meant to restore something that was actively being damaged in real time, while you were working on it, while the fractures were still opening. She had never done that before. She was going to have to figure out how. The call Damian made lasted 11 minutes. Elara sat in the archive room and listened to his voice through the wall, not the words, just the register. The flat, controlled tone from the first half, and then something that shifted in the second half into something more clipped, more pressured. The sound of a man receiving information that was restructuring his understanding of the situation in real time. When he came back, he stood in the doorway of the archive room and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him yet. Not the composed surface from their first conversation. Not the fractured thing beneath it she'd glimpsed in moments. Something in between those two, a man who had stopped managing what his face did because there was no longer a point to it. She didn't go to the federal investigators, he said. Elara looked up. She went to 2 of them, he said. Specifically, not to the office, not through official channels. To 2 individual agents she's had contact with for the past 18 months. She offered them a proffer. Elara understood what that meant. A proffer, a preliminary offer of cooperation. Not a formal agreement, not yet, but the opening move of someone who intended to become a witness. Against the organization, she said. Against me, he said. Specifically, she set down the index card she'd been holding. How much does she have? She said. Enough. He came into the room and sat down across from her, and the way he sat was different from every other time he'd sat across from her in the past 2 days, heavier, without the careful posture of a man managing his own presentation. She's been building a parallel record for 2 years. Every decision I made that she disagreed with, every time I diverted organizational resources toward Ravenmere Falls, every communication that touched on my personal motivations. She is more than I knew she was keeping. Can she be stopped? No, he said it without hesitation, and I'm not going to try. Elara looked at him. If I try to stop her, he said, I become the thing the federal case already suspects I am. A criminal organization head interfering with a federal investigation. That's not I won't do that, even if she buries you. Even then. She looked at his face. She was looking for the thing that wasn't true in what he'd just said, the way she looked for the thing that wasn't true in a damaged painting, the place where the restoration diverged from the original, where someone had filled in a gap with something that approximated the real thing, but wasn't it. She didn't find it. He meant what he'd said, all of it. Then what do you do? She said. I call my own lawyers and I get ahead of it, he said. I go to the investigators first. Not because Victoria is going to, because it's the right thing to do. I've been building toward legitimate operations for 3 years, and I've been doing it while keeping one foot in the old structure because I was afraid of what full separation would cost. It costs less than this. It might cost you everything, she said. Yes, the organization. Parts of the operation that haven't been cleaned up yet. Yes, people who are loyal to you are going to feel exposed. I know. I'll do what I can to protect them within the law. Beyond that, he stopped. He put his hands on the table. They were not entirely steady. She noticed that. She had been noticing things about him all weekend. The way she noticed things about objects she was asked to assess, cataloging, building a picture, and this was the first time she had seen his hands not entirely steady. Beyond that, I can't protect everyone from the consequences of what I built. I built it. I have to own that. The room was quiet. Somewhere on the floor below them, the machinery ran on. I need to tell you something, he said. Tell me. I should have done this years ago. All of it. Separated from the organization, gone legitimate, dealt with the federal exposure. I knew it. I've known it for a long time. He looked at the table. I didn't do it because it was easier to keep controlling things from inside the structure. And because I told myself the community work made it not okay, but worth it. Justified. I told myself that every year I delayed the separation was another year of being able to do things like Ravenmere Falls. That's not entirely wrong, she said. It's not entirely right either. No. He looked up at her. I'm telling you this because I want you to know who you're choosing to be in this room with. Not the version of me that rebuilt a foundry and kept your articles in a filing cabinet. The whole version. Elara looked at him for a long moment. I know who I'm in this room with, she said. I've known since yesterday morning. I'm still here. He breathed out slowly. Okay, he said. Call your lawyers, she said. Then call the investigators. I'll write a supplemental statement, not just about the community work. About what I witnessed this weekend. Victoria's call, the meeting, the documents she showed me. All of it. That's a significant thing to put your name on. I'm aware. Your career is mine to navigate, she said. Stop trying to protect me from my own decisions. He almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was in the neighborhood of one, the expression of a man who recognized something and didn't have the right words for it. Old habit, he said. Break it, she said. He got up and went to make his calls. Elara sat in the archive room and rose. She was still writing 2 hours later when Damian came back and told her the preliminary meeting with the federal investigators was set for the following morning. His lead attorney, a woman named Rosalind Hecht, who had flown in from New York and whom Elara met briefly in the hallway compact. Direct? The kind of lawyer who made you feel the room had gotten smaller when she entered it, had advised that Damian's voluntary proffer significantly changed the posture of the investigation. Not resolved it, changed it. How long? Elara asked Hecht directly. Hecht looked at her with the calibrated expression of a professional deciding how much plain language to use. If the cooperation is full and the documentation is as clean as he says, 6 months to a year before any charges are formalized, if they are. The community development activities are genuinely separable. The question is everything else. And Victoria's proffer? Complicates things. But a voluntary cooperation from the target of an investigation generally carries more weight than a hostile witness with a documented personal conflict. Your statement about her conduct this weekend will be relevant. I'll have it finished today. Hecht nodded and moved on, and Elara went back to writing. At 4 o'clock, she looked up and realized she hadn't eaten since the crackers on the train the previous morning, and that her hands were stiff and her neck hurt, and the light in the archive room had changed from morning gray to the particular amber of late afternoon coming through old windows. She went downstairs and out the front door and stood on the foundry steps and called her mother. Vivian answered on the second ring. I saw the news, her mother said. Not accusatory, not panicked. The voice of a woman who had weathered enough that her first response to a crisis was information gathering rather than reaction. The story online, your name. I know, Elara said. I need to explain some things. You need to come home first, her mother said. And eat something. You sound like someone who hasn't eaten. I haven't. Then come home. She went home. Her father was in the kitchen when she got there. He had seen the story too, she could tell, from the way he looked at her when she came in, the particular careful look, a man who has processed something difficult and is waiting to hear what's true before he decides how to feel about it. She sat at the kitchen table, and her mother put food in front of her, and she ate, and then she told them. Not everything. She was not going to put every dimension of Damian's organizational exposure in front of her parents over the kitchen table. But the parts that were theirs to know the house, the deed transfer, what it meant legally and what the risk had been, and what was being done to protect it. Her father's position, the federal investigation, and what Damian's cooperation meant for the Ironvale assets. Her father listened with his hands around his coffee cup and did not interrupt. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. The job, her father said. You're telling me it's real. I confirmed it with 7 workers and with the employment records, she said. Your work is real, Dad. Nobody manufactured that. But the money that funded it is complicated, she said. The origins are, yes, complicated. But the work itself, The foundry, what you've been doing in that archive that's not going anywhere. Damian is putting it in a community trust, legal, permanent, independent of him or the organization. Her father looked at his hands. He should have told me, he said. Not angrily. The way a man said something when he had arrived at a conclusion after long thought. Yes, Elara said, he knows that. I would have said no, Caleb said. If he'd come to my door and told me who he was and where the money came from. I know. And then I would have lost the house. He was quiet. And I would have kept my pride intact, and your mother, and I would have been sleeping in someone's guest room trying to figure out where to go at 60 years old. Elara didn't say anything. I don't know what to do with that, her father said. Neither does he, she said. That's honest, at least. Her mother had been quiet through all of this, which for Vivian Whitmore was unusual. She got up and refilled her coffee, looked at her daughter of a betrayal, a woman who had been reading her child's face for 32 years and had long since learned to read the things her child was not saying. You're staying, Vivian said. Not a question. Elara looked at her. I don't know yet. You're staying, her mother said again. Not pushy. Certain the certainty of someone who knows the shape of a thing before it knows its own shape. You have that look. The one you get when you've found something worth working on. Elara looked at the table. It's complicated, she said. Everything worth having is complicated, her mother said. Eat the rest of that. She ate the rest of it. The next morning came with actual rain, not the threatening gray of the day before, but real rain, steady and cold, the kind that settled in for the day without apology. Elara was up before, and she sat with her laptop and finished the supplemental statement she had been working on and sent it to Rosalind Hecht at 6:45 in the morning. Hecht replied, in 8 minutes received. Well done. This is useful. Elara closed her laptop. She put on her coat and walked to the foundry in the rain. Damian was already there. Of course he was. She was beginning to understand that he probably slept in that office more nights than not, that the man who had rebuilt a town had also quietly made the building that anchored it into something like a home because he didn't know what else to do. With himself in the hours, when there was nothing to manage. She found him in the archive room. He was sitting at the work table with his father's organizational files, the actual papers from the old Crosswell family records, which he had apparently been keeping in the foundry building, and which were now spread across the table in a way that suggested he had been there for hours and had moved past, organized into something more like reckoning. He looked up when she came in. His eyes were tired in a way that went past one sleepless night. The meeting is at 9, he said. I know. She sat down across from him. How are you? He looked at her like the question surprised him. Like it was not a question he had been asked recently or answered honestly. I've been better, he said. That's true, she said. And you've probably been worse. Also true. She looked at the papers spread across the table. Old documents, some of them. She could see the age and the paper quality, the way the edges had begun to fragment. What are these, my father's records, he said. The original organizational documents. The things I inherited. He picked up a sheet and looked at it. I've been trying to figure out what I actually built versus what I inherited. What was mine versus what was already there when I arrived. And it's complicated to separate, he said. Some of both. More of both than I expected. She looked at a photograph that was sitting on top of one of the stacks. A man she didn't know older, heavy-set, with Damian's eyes and a different face. His father, she assumed. He looked like a man who had built something, and knew it. He would have hated what I'm doing today, Damian said, following her gaze. Going to the investigators. Cooperating. He would have called it surrender. Is it? No, he said. It's the opposite of what he would have done. Which might be the point. He set the photograph face down on the table. Not violently. Deliberately. The gesture of someone placing something where it needed to be placed. He built an organization that survived by never giving ground. And it worked for him, for his time. But it cost him. It cost him everything outside the organization. Everything that wasn't the work. He was quiet for a moment. I don't want to end up with only the work. Elara looked at him. Then don't, she said. It's not that simple. Most things worth doing aren't simple, she said. That doesn't mean they're impossible. He looked at her across the table, across his father's old documents, across 2 days of the most difficult conversations either of them had probably had in years, across 15 years of distance and silence, and one unsent letter, and one returned letter, and a filing cabinet full of her published work. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Ask. When this is over, the investigation, the trust transfer, all of it. When Ravenmere Falls is actually legally, fully free of me, what do you want?" She sat with that. Not what he wanted. What she wanted. He had asked it correctly. "I want my project assignments back," she said. "Which is going to take time and documentation and probably a very uncomfortable meeting with my director." "Yes. I want my parents to keep their house," she said, without any ambiguity about the legal status. "Already in process," he said. "Hecht filed the protective documentation yesterday afternoon. The deed is clean, the transfer is permanent, and it's been structured to survive even a worst-case outcome from the investigation. My father's position. The community trust will honor it," he said. "I spoke with the 3 workers who have agreed to form the initial trustee board. Roy is one of them. He asked specifically that the Heritage Archive project continue. They want your father to run it." She looked at him. "You ask them about my father, before you ask me about any of this," she said. "I wanted to have an answer," he said, "in case the answer mattered." She breathed in slowly and let it out. "It matters," she said. He nodded. "And us," she said. "You didn't ask about us." "I didn't ask because I didn't want to frame it wrong," he said. "I didn't want to ask in a way that made you feel like the answer was owed to me, or that anything you'd done this weekend was transactional. I am aware that the way I show people I care about them has historically looked like managing their circumstances. I don't want to do that with this question." She looked at him for a long moment. "That might be the most self-aware thing you've said in 2 days," she said. "I've had a lot of time to think. What do you actually want to ask me?" He looked at his hands on the table, then at her. "Can we try?" "Not from where we were. Not from 15 years ago. From here. From this, whatever this is." She thought about her mother's voice. "You're staying." The certainty of a woman who knew her daughter's face. She thought about the workers on the foundry floor. The rhythm of the machines. Roy and Sheila and Marcus. Her father's handwriting on index cards. A sound scene. She thought about a letter that had never arrived and one that had never been sent, and the particular cruelty of 2 people who had loved each other, failing to find each other, across a distance that was made entirely of fear. "Yes," she said, "but I'm not doing it from Boston." He looked at her. "I'm going to open a studio here," she said, "in the historic district. I looked at the spaces last night. There are 3 available storefronts in the renovation corridor. Real rent, market rate, no intervention from you or Iron Veil or the Trust or anyone associated with either. I know you wouldn't mean to," she said, "but I need you to promise me. Because the minute you do something, fix something, smooth something without asking me first, we are going to have a problem." "I promise," he said, "and I mean that in the way that's uncomfortable, not the easy way." "I know the difference," she said. "That's why I'm accepting it." The meeting with the federal investigators that morning lasted 4 hours. Elara was not in the room for most of it. She gave her statement and then waited in the hallway outside with Rosalind Hecht's junior associate, a young man named Tobias, who offered her bad coffee from a vending machine and didn't try to make conversation, which she appreciated. At one point, through the door, she heard Damian's voice, not the words, just the steadiness of it. The same register for 4 hours. Not defensive, not strategic, not performing. Just steady. She thought about what it cost a man like that to do what he was doing in that room. The dismantling of something he had built and maintained and survived, inside of for 15 years, piece by piece, in a government conference room, on a rainy Wednesday, in a small Massachusetts town. She thought it cost more than most people would pay. She thought he was paying it anyway. When it was over, Damian came out of the room looking like someone who had run a very long distance and had stopped only because the finish line had finally appeared. He sat down in one of the hallway chairs and leaned his forearms on his knees and looked at the floor. Elara sat down beside him, not across from him. Beside. "How bad?" she said. "Bad," he said. "Manageable, both." "Timeline? 8 months, probably." Maybe more. They want everything. I agreed to give them everything. He paused. There are going to be parts of this that are in the press. I can't control that, I know. Your name might still come up. I know, your director. I'll handle my director, she said. I've been doing hard things alone for a long time. I know how to do that. He looked at her then, sideways, the look of someone who is sitting beside another person rather than facing them and has to turn slightly to see their face. You don't have to do it alone this time, he said. She held that for a moment, feeling the weight of it, feeling how easy it would be to deflect it, to say something that kept the distance intact, to be the version of herself that had been so carefully constructed to need nothing from anyone. I know, she said. I'm still figuring out what that means. Me too, he said. They sat there, in the hallway while the rain hit the windows, and pretended to read something on his phone, and Roland Hecht came out of the conference room with the contained energy of a woman who had just done good work and knew it. We'll need follow-up documentation by Friday, Hecht said. But the initial meeting went as well as it could have gone. Better, honestly. Better how? Elara asked. The investigator's primary concern has been whether the community development activities were genuine, Hecht said. Your statement, combined with the employment records and the worker testimonies we've been gathering, has made a strong case that they were. The Foundry trust transfer, if it's executed within the next 30 days, goes a significant way toward demonstrating separation. She looked at Damian. Victoria's proffer is still a complication, but a voluntary subject with documented community benefit has a different profile than a hostile witness with a personal conflict. That's not nothing. Damian nodded. Hecht went back into the conference room. Elara and Damian sat in the hallway for another few minutes without talking. It was not uncomfortable. It was the particular quality of silence between people who have said most of the things that needed saying and are now simply occupying the same space, which, after everything, felt like its own kind of achievement. I need to call my father, she said. About the trust, he said. About his position? About everything, she said. He deserves to know everything. Not a managed version of it. All of it. He's 63 and he lost 20 years of his working life to something that wasn't his fault, and then he quietly rebuilt himself without asking anyone for anything. And I am not going to tell him a comfortable version of what happened in this town. He gets the real one. Damian was quiet. He's going to be angry, he said. Probably, she said, he should be. At me, yes. I know, and then she said, if he wants to, he can decide what to do with that anger. Whether to stay in the archive room and keep building what he's built. Whether to walk away. That's his decision to make, not mine and not yours. Damian nodded slowly. I'll meet with him, he said, if he wants. Directly, no lawyers, no intermediary. Just the two of us, and whatever he needs to say to me, he can say it. I'll tell him that, she said. She got up. I'm going to go call him now, she said. And then I'm going to walk through the historic district and look at those storefronts, because I wasn't exaggerating about the studio. I know you weren't, and Damian. She looked at him, still sitting in the hallway chair, with the exhaustion of the morning on his face, and something else there, too, something lighter than she'd seen in him yet. Something that had come through the hardest part of the day and was still present. The filing cabinet. He looked at her. The articles, she said. The research, everything you kept. Yes, I want to see all of it, she said. Not because I'm angry about it. Because she stopped, trying to find the honest version. Because that's 12 years of my work, and I want to know what it looked like from the outside. What someone who was paying attention saw in it. She paused. I think I'd like to know what you thought of it. Something in his face that she was going to have to learn a name for. Not happiness, exactly, something more specific. The expression of a person who has been waiting for permission to be seen in a particular way and has finally, unexpectedly, been given it. I thought it was extraordinary, he said. That's a start, she said. She went to call her father. The conversation with Caleb Whitmore lasted 40 minutes and covered more ground than any conversation Elara had had with her father in years. He listened. He asked questions. He got quiet in the way he got quiet when he was genuinely angry, not loud, not explosive, but deep and still, The anger of a man who had been raised to be contained about what he felt and had mastered it so thoroughly that his silence was than most people's raised voices. He said, "He should have come to my door." She said, "Yes." He said, "I would have said no." She said, "Yes. He knows that." Long silence. "But I would have been wrong to say no," Caleb said. Not easily, like he was pulling it out of himself. "I would have been wrong. I know I would have been wrong. I would have chosen pride and lost the house, and your mother we would have been all right, eventually probably, but it would have cost her. Cost her in ways she wouldn't have told me about." He was quiet. "I don't know if I forgive him for not coming to the door. But I understand why he didn't. Those aren't the same thing," Elara said. "No," he said. "They're not. I'll figure out the difference when I talk to him." "He wants to meet with you," she said. "Whenever you're ready. However you want to do it. This week," Caleb said. "Not because I'm ready. Because I'd rather have it behind me than in front of me." "I'll tell him." Elara. His voice changed. The shift from processing anger to something more personal. "Are you all right? You, specifically. Not the situation." "You." She stood on the sidewalk in the rain outside the federal building, with her coat collar up, and thought about how to answer that honestly. "I'm tired," she said, "and angry about some of it. And I lost project assignments that I'm going to have to earn back, which is going to be a difficult conversation with my director." She paused. "But I'm all right. You're staying," he said. She smiled despite herself. Her mother's certainty, her father's perception. She had been formed by both. "For a while," she said. "I'm going to open a studio here." Silence. Then good. Just that. One word with a lot of weight in it. She said goodbye and walked through the rain. The 3 storefronts in the historic renovation corridor were on a block that had been, in her childhood, largely empty, a stretch of old commercial buildings that had gone untenanted through the slow decline of the town's working years. Now the block was alive. A bookshop at one end, the coffee shop she'd been in the first morning, and between them, the 3 vacant spaces that had been recently rehabilitated, new windows, refinished floors visible through the glass, the smell of fresh plaster still faintly present, even through the rain. She stood in front of the middle one. It was the right size. Not large, she didn't need large. A workspace, storage for materials, a consultation area for clients. The light from the front windows would be sufficient for assessment work. The back room would need proper ventilation for chemical processes, but that was manageable. She took out her phone and called the number on the rental listing. The conversation was brief. The space was available. The rent was market rate. The landlord was a woman named Mrs. Chen, who had been in Ravenmere Falls for 40 years and who asked what kind of business it would be. And when Elara said art conservation and restoration, Mrs. Chen said, "That sounds like something this town could use," and they agreed to meet on Friday. Elara put her phone away and stood in front of the space, with the rain coming down around her. She thought about the photograph in the archive room. 20 men in 1922, squinting against a bright day, building something that would outlast them. She thought about her father's handwriting on index cards. Careful, precise, the handwriting of a man who understood that details mattered. She thought about Victoria Crosswell in a hotel bar, with her composed face and her calculated offer, and the particular coldness of a person who had confused strategy for survival so long she had forgotten the difference. She thought about a filing cabinet with her entire career inside it, and a man who had read every word and kept it, and what that meant about the nature of attention and the nature of love, and the complicated space between them. She thought about what it meant to restore something, not to make it new, not to erase what had happened to it, but to understand the damage well enough to stabilize it, to prevent further deterioration, to make it possible for the thing to exist in its true form rather than in the collapsed version of itself that time and harm had created. She had spent 15 years doing that for other people's objects. She thought it was time to try it on her own life. The meeting between Damian and Caleb Whitmore happened 3 days later, in the Whitmore kitchen, at Caleb's request. Elara was not present for most of it. She sat on the porch, the new boards, solid under her, and listened to the rain that had returned, lighter now, more of a mist than a downpour, and waited. It lasted 2 hours. When Caleb came out, he sat down in the other porch chair and looked at the street for a while, without saying anything. Well, Elara said. He's a hard man to stay angry at, Caleb said. I don't mean he's charming. I mean he doesn't argue. He just takes it, whatever you give him. He doesn't explain himself more than once. He just lets you be angry. That's not the same as him being right, she said. No, her father said. It's not. He was quiet for a moment. He told me something. About when he first came back to this town. Before Iron Vale. He drove through here alone one night, just to see it. Just to see what had happened to the place. Caleb looked at his hands. He said he sat outside this house for about 20 minutes. Saw the lights on. Knew we were in there, he paused. And he drove away. Because he didn't know how to do the thing he wanted to do, which was just knock on the door. As himself, and ask how we were. Elara said nothing. That's a particular kind of loneliness, her father said. Sitting outside a lit house, and not being able to knock. She looked at the street. I know, she said. Do you, he said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation, from a man who had watched his daughter build walls for 12 years, and had never said anything about it, because she was his daughter, and he respected the walls, even when he didn't understand them. I'm working on it, she said. I can see that, he said. The trust transfer happened on the last day of October, in a simple signing ceremony that Elara attended as a witness. No press, no announcement. A room with 7 people, Damian, Rosalind Hecht, the 3 foundry workers who formed the initial trustee board, Roy, Sheila, and a man named Daniel, who had been with Blackridge from 1995 to its closure, and had come back when Iron Vale reopened, and Elara and Caleb Whitmore, who was there in his capacity as heritage consultant and who sat at the end of the table and watched Damian sign over controlling authority of the building and its operations to the community trust with an expression that Elara could not entirely read, but that looked like it had several things in it at once. When it was done, Roy shook Damian's hand. Damian shook it back. That was all. No speeches, no celebration. The work continued. The formal conversation between Damian and the federal investigators continued through November and into December, conducted through lawyers and structured sessions that Elara had no direct involvement in, but that Damian reported to her in the evenings, simply and without editorializing, because she had asked him to, and he had learned, with difficulty and some backsliding, to trust that she could hold information without needing it to be managed first. Victoria's cooperation with the investigation produced 2 significant findings that the investigator shared with Damian's legal team as required. One was damaging documentation of a financial structure within the organization that Damian had known about and not dismantled as quickly as he should have. He acknowledged it. The other was, unexpectedly, not damaging at all Victoria's records of his Ravenmere Falls decision-making, presented as evidence of compromised judgment, instead demonstrated a consistent pattern of resource allocation toward legitimate community benefit that predated Elara's arrival and would continue independently of her. The investigators noted this. Rosalind Hecht called it a gift from an unlikely source. Elara thought it was probably not intentional. She thought Victoria Crosswell had kept those records to use against her brother and had not anticipated that the same records would partially exonerate him. She thought that was the particular irony of very precise, very strategic people. Sometimes their own precision worked against them. She did not say this to Damian. He was managing enough without commentary on his sister's miscalculations. Victoria did not contact Elara again. Elara did not reach out to her. There were things between the two of them that had no clean resolution: the call, the offer, the leak, the damage done to people who had no part in the Crosswell family's internal power structure. Elara thought about that sometimes. She did not think the damage was unforgivable. She thought it might not be forgiven. Both of those things were allowed to be true at the same time. She signed the lease on the studio space on the 1st of November. She spent the first 2 weeks cleaning, installing proper ventilation, setting up the climate control system that was non-negotiable for the kind of work she did, arranging her materials, building the consultation space. She did it herself, mostly, with help from her father, on 2 occasions carrying equipment, positioning the larger storage units, and from Damian once, when something needed to be moved that was genuinely too heavy for anyone to manage alone. He showed up when she called. He moved the thing she needed moved. He did not rearrange anything else, or offer opinions on the layout, or make any suggestions that she hadn't asked for. She thanked him. He said, "That's what I'm here for," and meant it plainly, without subtext. She looked at him in her studio, her space, her tools around her, her future taking shape in the room, and felt something she had not let herself feel in a long time. Not happiness exactly, something more durable than happiness. The particular satisfaction of a person who is building something real in a place that is actually theirs. "You can stay," she said, "if you want." He looked around the studio. "You're going to need better lighting over the main work table." "I know," she said. "I've ordered it. The ventilation is good." "I know. I installed it myself." He looked at her. "You installed it yourself," he said. It took 2 days and one very instructive YouTube video," she said. But yes, something in his face. The neighborhood of a smile, closer than it had been in the hallway after the investigation meeting. "Getting there. I believe you," he said. "Good," she said. "That's the baseline." The first piece Elara restored in her Ravenmere Falls studio was the Foundry photograph. The one her father had found in the archive, the original crew photograph from 1922, black and white, 20 men squinting against a bright day. It had been damaged by moisture and time, the edges fragile, the surface clouded in places, a significant crack running through the lower right quadrant where it had been improperly stored at some point in the past 80 years. She spent 3 weeks on it. She did not rush it. She documented every stage. She used the same precision she applied to museum pieces, the same patient attention, the same refusal to fill in what she couldn't verify with something that only approximated the truth. When she was finished, it was not a new photograph. It was the old one, stabilized. The damage was not invisible. A trained eye could still see where the crack had been, where the surface restoration began and the original ended. She did not try to hide that. She preserved the evidence of what had happened to it, because that was part of its history too, and hiding it would have been a lie. She framed it and brought it to her father. He held it for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "You can still see where it cracked." "Yes," she said. "That's the point." He looked at her. "The crack is part of the record," she said. "It happened. It's real. You don't restore something by pretending it wasn't damaged. Sydney. You restore it by understanding the damage well enough to stop it from spreading, and then giving the original thing back to itself." Caleb looked at the photograph, at the 20 men. At the crack, still visible, stabilized. "That applies to more than photographs," he said. "Most things do," she said. He put it on the wall of the archive room, on a hook beside his index card collection, in a building that now belonged to the people who worked in it. Winter came. Elara worked. She took 2 commissions in December, a private collector in Northampton with a damaged 19th century landscape, and the Ravenmere Falls Historical Society, which had a collection of documents from the town's founding years that needed assessment and stabilization. The work was real, and it was hers, and she did it in her own space at her own pace, and she paid fair rent, and nobody fixed anything without asking her. Her director at the Boston Conservation Institute called in early January. The project suspensions had been reviewed. Given the documentation, Elara's own statement, the federal investigator's characterization of her role, the eventual press correction that ran when the investigation's parameters became clearer. The Institute's board had concluded that her involvement had been that of a witness and participant in good faith, not a knowing party to organizational misconduct. Her active project assignments were reinstated. She thanked him. She did not go back to Boston. She had work in Ravenmere Falls. Damian came to the studio on a Tuesday evening in late January, after the workday, after the investigation meeting that had run long, after a call with lawyers that had taken 2 hours and resolved one problem and created 2 smaller ones that were manageable. He came because they had developed, over the preceding months, the habit of evening together, not by design, just often enough that it had become a thing that existed between them without needing to be named. He sat in the consultation chair, the one she used for clients, and watched her work. She was cleaning the surface of the Northampton landscape, a process that required patience and a magnifying lens and a very small tool and no distraction. He was quiet. He had learned to be quiet when she was working. It had taken approximately 3 weeks and several gentle redirections, but he had learned it. After a while, she said without looking up, the investigators called Hecht today. She told me, he said. The timeline moved. Shorter or longer? Shorter. The voluntary cooperation is doing what she said it would. She made a small, careful stroke with the tool. How do you feel about that? She said. He was quiet for a moment. Afraid, he said, in a way that feels different from before. Before I was afraid of losing things I'd built. Now I'm afraid of. He stopped. I'm afraid of the space on the other side of it. What I'm supposed to be when the organization isn't the organizing principle of my life. She set the tool down and looked at him. You don't have to know that yet, she said. No? No. You just have to get through the next thing. And then the thing after that. She picked up the tool again. That's what I did. For 12 years. I didn't have a plan for my whole life. I had the next project. He looked at her. And now, he said. She made another stroke. Careful. Exact. Now, she said, I have more than a project. He was quiet. She could feel him in the room the way she could feel weather changing a particular quality of presence with that she had spent 15 years learning to live without, and was now, slowly, carefully learning to live with. Not dependence, not need. Something more equal than either of those words, the particular gravity of two people who had each, independently, survived something difficult, and who were choosing to be in the same room for reasons that had nothing to do with survival. Victoria called me, he said. She looked up when? Yesterday. He leaned forward slightly. She didn't say much. She said she hoped the studio was going well. He paused. She knew about the studio, which means she's been paying attention. From wherever she is. Elara thought about that. Are you going to respond? She said. I don't know yet, he said. She's my sister. She tried to use you as a weapon against me, and she leaked information during a federal investigation, and she is not someone I can. I don't know what she is to me right now. You don't have to know right now, Elara said. Same principle. He looked at her for a moment. Do you always do that? Do what? Take the thing I'm most tangled in and say it plainly. I try to, she said. It's harder with my own things. I know, he said. I've noticed. She returned to the painting. Outside, the January night pressed against the studio windows. The street was quiet. The foundry at the other end of town was dark. At this hour, the day shift long finished, the machinery resting. The bookshop was closed. The coffee shop was closed. The hardware store was closed, and the bakery, and all the small working businesses that had survived because of money whose origins were complicated and work whose legitimacy was not. 34 families in their homes. Workers with paychecks that cleared. A heritage archive that was growing. A crack in a photograph, visible, stabilized, part of the record. Elara worked until the light in the section she was cleaning was right, and then she set the tool down and covered the painting for the night, and she and Damian walked out into the cold together. The street was empty. Their breath showed in the cold air. The foundry was dark at the far end, but its lights, the perimeter lights that ran on automatic, lit the building's outline against the sky. She looked at it for a moment. Do you remember, she said, what the platform looked like when I got off the train? The first morning. Repainted, he said, red, close to the original color. I noticed, she said, before I noticed anything else. I know, he said. I was watching from the car. She looked at him. You were there, she said. I knew your train time, he said. I wasn't going to. I didn't know if I was going to come out. I sat in the parking lot for about 20 minutes. And then you picked up your case and walked out, and looked at the town like you were assessing damage, he said. And I knew you were going to find me eventually, because that's what you do. She looked at the foundry. She looked at the street. She looked at the man beside her, imperfect, complicated, not fixed, not finished, standing in the cold outside a studio that was hers in a town that had been rebuilt by hands that were not always clean, trying to learn what it meant to be known without managing the knowing. Come on, she said. They walked toward the lit end of the street, and the town was quiet around them, and nothing between them was hidden, And that was not the same as easy, but it was real, and real was what she had always known how to work with.